Hello and welcome back to the MXGP Podcast Show on Vital MX. We've been absent for some time. I don't even know how long, but we missed the MXGP of Latvia, my favourite Grand Prix, so you know that hurt me dearly. But we're back to discuss the MXGP of Great Britain, round 12 at Matterley Basin, and what it lacked in outright incredible racing. It's certainly made up for in the way of storylines and narratives from the paddock, some of which we will get into on this episode of the MXGP Podcast Show. Thank you to Polisport and Prox for sticking with us during our brief absence. We're happy to be back and spreading the message of our loyal sponsors. We appreciate all they do for not only us, but of course the industry at large as well. And we also appreciate our co-host who was waiting in the wings, desperate, itching to talk MXGP, and we appreciate him bearing with us as we battled on. And now we're back, and it's Paddock Pass Podcasts. Adam Wheeler, how's it going?
Hey, Lewis. Waiting in the wings, I guess you could say. It was kind of strange, really, post Latvia not having a call with you and talking about MXGP. But I want to kind of, on behalf of all the people that sort of listen or follow this podcast, I want to ask you how you are, because there were some pretty graphic photos of you in hospital. And I guess everybody really wants to know whether, Jeffrey's kind of 2 wins on the bounce and re-emergence as an MXGP force, was this the cause of your weakness and your vulnerability? Did you swoon a bit too much?
Well, first of all, I was on a lot of medication. I don't remember sending photos. So apologies for that. That's news to me. I was on a lot of medication.
Well, you made a critical mistake in posting like a picture from intensive care saying I'm cooked, which I thought was not really helping your narrative in the US of being unable to cope with the high temperatures around the nationals. I thought it wasn't a choice, wasn't the best phrasing for a social media post.
No, and to be honest, my vague memories of that as well. All I remember is, I think at that point, my mum said to me, "Who do you want me to tell?" And I just went, "Oh, I'll just do a story, and everyone can figure it out."
Well, can you summarize what has happened to you in maybe 3 to 4 lines, and then because it's been pretty graphic and I have been concerned. I've been messaging you and, almost like on a daily basis to sort of find out how you are. So, what happened?
Well, first of all, on that note, I appreciate your care, and actually touching it was, and also really opened up Pandora's box in my brain, seeing how much the MXGP paddock cared, perhaps in comparison to the American paddock. It's almost like, I don't know, it really was in a bad place. That really, like the amount of messages from people I've not even spoken to in like a year, like riders and mechanics and team managers. And I was like, admittedly, if you're listening to this, I couldn't reply to a lot of them because I was in and out of
intensive care.
And also there was some days where I was not with it at all. No, I don't really know what happened, to be honest, other than a combination of... I've got Epstein-Barr, so I'm now one of those people. Or mono. I think they're the same thing. I can't really figure it out. I think I've got mono, but as far as I can tell, mono is Epstein-Barr. But somehow that was made worse by the fact that I also had strep throat, and effectively, the reason for the concern is that together, they had pushed my uvula into my airway, and I was choking myself because I literally, like, when I went to urgent care, which is, I don't know what the equivalent is. It's not, I don't think it's A&E, because ER is A&E. Here, I went to urgent care, which is like some sort of doctors that you can get to quite quickly. Yeah. Obviously, you have to pay, so you get in quite quick because you give your card over. And they immediately sent me to ER and were like, "We're going to call you an ambulance." And I said, "No, I don't want that because that costs money. No, I don't want an ambulance." And I went, "Well, I'll drive because it'll be quicker." And they went, "Yeah, drive then because you need to go to ER as quickly as possible." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I couldn't talk at this point. I say this, the communication was going on through the Notes app on my phone because I literally couldn't physically talk because I was choking on my own saliva. That's why I went to urgent care, because I woke up and I couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
And then that realised I also couldn't talk because I couldn't breathe. Had a horrific experience where they put a camera. I may sue. They put a camera in trauma. I went to trauma at some point. They put a camera up my nose, as they do. I think this is fairly routine. They put a camera up my nose to put down my throat.
Right.
And I had like 10 trauma doctors around me. Had no idea what was going on. Couldn't communicate other than through my phone notes. And I was screaming. I've never felt pain like it, right? And then
from the camera?
Yeah.
It sounds very Total Recall.
Well, and they set a camera and they're going, oh, it's not going in. And I'm going, it's not. It's not going to work. And then after the fact, come to find out, after I went from trauma to ICU, the ICU doctor went, yeah, they're going to come around and do a camera up your nose. And I was like, no, I've already had that. And they went, what do you mean you've already had that? The doctor that specialises in that isn't in until this afternoon. And I was like, well, this woman did it. And she went, that woman isn't qualified to do that. Like, that woman doesn't, I don't think that woman's ever done that in her life. And I was like, well, yeah, I could tell based on the sheer pain and just rummaging around.
Oh, dear.
My nose was basically bleeding out for 36 hours. Like, I had a persistent nosebleed afterwards for 36 hours. So God knows what they did with this bloody camera. And then they tried putting it down when the nose didn't work. And they went, "Oh, I'll put it down your throat." So then I got my notes out and I was like, I can't talk because I haven't got a hole in my throat. Like, there's no room for a camera. So
sounds like agony.
They put the trauma in the name Trauma Centre or whatever it's called. That's for sure. But we'll see what happens. Maybe I've never had doctors come to me before and ask if I want to be resuscitated as well. That was interesting. But when you get asked that question, you suddenly think quite deeply about life. But ultimately, it's all
surely the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I guess. And ultimately,
on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you now?
I'm over it. I don't know. To be honest, I'm kind of just over it. Like, I'm just like, I don't know. I need to sort myself out, to be honest, which is kind of why I'm here doing this podcast.
Okay, so when will be your next race, do you think?
Redbud, because Cairoli's going to be there and I really want to do something with him. So I'm like the journalist in me really wants to do a story with Cairoli. And also, I like Cairoli and I like Jill a lot. So
that means Lommel is definitely off the agenda.
No, Lommel, based on Redbud, I'll see how Lommel goes.
Okay.
I can't move around a lot without getting lightheaded, which is a slight issue at the moment, but Lommel's still a month away. I'm just concerned about how like an airport and the walking around the airport will go. Because obviously that's more taxing than you realise. But I'd still like to do Lommel. And to be honest...
Transatlantic travel as well. I mean, just travelling full stop. I've just come back from working the Italian GP at Mugello. In MotoGP, that's why I wasn't at Matterley Basin, and I spent 9 hours in Florence Airport, thanks to the aeroplane having a problem with its computers, trying to take off twice, not sort of working, and then being shuffled into the terminal again in a very small airport that was overcrowded, so there was nowhere really to sit or work. So it was a pretty sobering experience, and if you have to cope with something like that with Epstein-Barr or just generally feeling a bit shitty, I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah, Italian airports aren't exactly banner items. Verona is terrible. Like, they're all terrible, really, aren't they? They're all just pokey. And EasyJet?
Malpensa is probably the best. Probably the best of them, purely because it's big.
Yeah,
Milan.
Yeah, that's true. But even before security, Malpensa's just messy, I find.
Yeah.
And also, there's two terminals, isn't there? The EasyJet terminal at Malpensa is equally horrific. And I was an EasyJet stan in my MXGP days, so that was where I lived. Except for Majora last year, where I obviously flew in internationally. But no, the good thing is I got to spend a lot of time watching MXGP this weekend, really engrossed in it. I've updated my stat spreadsheet to where I now have 40 MXGP riders' careers, hence why I managed to do a tweet.
Okay.
Hence why I managed to do a tweet that Antonio Cairoli finished in the top 10 for the 262nd time. That was made possible.
I did see that tweet. Yeah, I was impressed.
Well, you thought to yourself, there's some classic Lewis prattling on about stuff that's irrelevant.
Well, I was also impressed with Tony's finish. What was he, 7th or 8th overall?
Yeah, 7-8, I think, for 7th.
Yeah. He said he didn't have any front brake in the first moto. So that was one thing. And I just thought, I mean, I know that he loves Matterley Basin, and it's obviously less taxing than, say, Lommel, which is also one of his favorite tracks. And compared to Arco di Trento, I think you can get away with having a slightly shitter start in Matterley Basin and still do something. Although the track prep, we probably have to talk about that in a moment. So yeah, it wasn't a great surprise that Tony posted those results, but then I was also pleasantly surprised that he managed to sort of get as high up as he did and run that pace. I mean, for the age that he is, I don't know. Does that say good things about MXGP, or does it just say amazing things about Tony Cairoli?
Well, this is actually exactly what I had to talk. This probably was the main reason I wanted to buck myself up and do this podcast, because I don't know. It says amazing things about Antonio Cairoli, of course, but I also think it says something about the state of MXGP, and also, I hate to do this, but I think it says something about Jeremy Seewer as well.
Yes. Also, we don't. One of the frustrations of not really being there and asking firsthand is that we don't know how much Tony's been riding behind the scenes. We're not entirely sure of the spec of the Ducati that he's riding. Is it something a bit more developed? These are factors as well that can come into play. He got better starts than Jeremy. I would just, I'm contradicting myself because I just said that, Matterley perhaps isn't as start essential as Arco. But, I think all these sort of factor in. But Lewis, I mean, it's also curious hearing and seeing some of the media around the AMA Pro Nationals and seeing riders like Benoit Patorel, Vincent Guillot, taking good results and getting a lot of media coverage, much more than they would have done, say, in MXGP. And I don't know what that says really for the level of each series, because Valentin is, on his day, easily capable of a top 6, top 7 finish in MXGP. But he's also able to do the same in the Pro Nationals, where the gates are full, compared to some of the MXGP versions. And that's another talking point, I think, that came up at Matterley Basin. In-front motor racing really needs to get those Monster Energy kind of tough blocks and just put them at like a diagonal in the gate and just make it look better. I mean, if you can't feel the gate, at least try and give the impression that, you're trying to reduce the dimensions or something, just so it doesn't look so hollow. But I mean, going back, it just, I'm not too sure. I'm a bit confused about what it says about the respective health or the depth of each particular championship.
Yeah, there are definitely examples in a moment of, if you want to be pro AMA, you can point to examples of that. If you want to be pro MXGP, you can point to examples of that as well. It's a little more fluid than maybe it's ever been before, and Cairoli's result at Redbud will probably be telling in itself. Now, I don't think that he will do as well as he did at Matterley. We know that this Redbud Matterley period has been highlighted on his calendar for some time. So without doubt, I feel as though he was better prepared for this than he was Trentino and Arnhem last year. And the results indicate that. The results of those previous two events weren't even comparable to what he did at Matterley Basin. But also, other riders did point to the fact that the racing was start dependent. There was no pass in the top 10 in the second MXGP moto. And had Seewer started 5th, he probably would have finished 5th. And, a lot of riders have said with Cairoli's results, insert other rider there, they would have taken that position. So there's a little bit of that. And as you alluded to, I've heard people say that it was an easier track and that would have helped Tony. I think there was a few maybe riders trying to justify it to themselves why Cairoli came out and did what he did when he really shouldn't have. You mentioned the front brake issue. He also dabbed his knee on Saturday and it was swollen, which, with all due respect, I just kind of don't bat an eye at now, because it feels as though whenever we see Tony Cairoli, he ends up with a swollen knee. That was also true in the latter part of his full-time career. So, I don't see that as a major issue. But I don't know if it is good. I mean, to be honest, watching Cairoli at Matterley, I thought to myself, I wonder if we can convince him to do a full season again. Because it was that promising.
I mean, it's such unique circumstances, isn't it? I mean, he can prep how he wants. He's under no pressure. That kind of wild card situation. We see it sometimes in MotoGP with particular riders. Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head there, Lewis. And also, we have to take into account it is Matterley, and it is a track that he likes. For American listeners, Matterley Basin is perhaps the most American track, I would say, on the calendar. You could maybe look at Cordoba, the new track from Argentina, as something kind of similar in terms of flow and speed. I'm struggling to think of anywhere else. There are distinct circuits on the calendar that are very kind of old school Grand Prix style. I mean, Tuchenthal as well. We had recently in Ernay, in Germany and France. They're sort of the opposite. But I think, Matterley Basin just suffered from an extremely rare case in the UK of having excellent weather. I mean, it was blustery, it was windy, but it was sunny, it's dry, it's been hot. And that kind of affected the track preparation. Jeffrey Herlings was pretty scathing on social media by saying the track was great on Saturday, perhaps when it was at its wettest or roughest. And then for Sunday, I don't know what the issue was there really. Maybe the track crew sort of ran out of water facilities. I don't know. But
as far as I've been able to make out, because there's a drought or whatever in the UK at the moment, it's very hot, unseasonably hot. There was an allotted amount of water on Saturday, which just wasn't enough, which is why qualifying was dusty, dry, hard pack. So Steve Dixon purchased more water Saturday night, which is why Sunday morning it was drenched and MX2 Moto 1 was overly watered and not ideal. And then obviously in the end, it didn't really make a difference because by the second MXGP Moto, we had another dry, fast track. So I don't know if there was really a solution, but listeners to me for some time will know that I've beat this drum for a while. Like, Matterley is a magnificent track. It looks incredible. But dirty little secret, it's not great for racing because it's so fast, it's so flowy, all of the corners are so open, there's no awkward technical section where a rider can make up time. Barring a major mistake, everyone just kind of follows each other in unison. And it was more magnified this weekend, yes, but I think that's a fundamental issue of Matterley as a whole. It's almost too perfect for racing.
Yeah, well, the track preparation really becomes key, doesn't it? Because the deeper and more rougher and the more technical it gets, the more riders are able to make a little bit of a difference. And when there is not much variation, then that's where it gets very, very static. Your point about the watering for the first MX2 moto is key because that was something that, caused Andrea Adamo to crash. He just lost traction in one particular section. The Italian, I think, finished something like 7th or 8th overall. It was a bit of a hit to his championship aspirations. Simon Längenfelder was perfect with a 1-1-1. And also, Oriol for the Gabriel SS24 KTM team. He was running away with the first MX2 moto. 5-second lead, I think, at one point, and then just slipped off through that wave section. And down he went, and it was a shame. That should have been sort of like a first Grand Prix podium, career podium for the Spaniard. But just another example of just a little slip, maybe on a track that was too slick, and that sort of opportunity went off. But it was good to see someone different leading in MX2.
Do you want to know what Oriol Oliver's first moto run bid for the overall podium in the second moto reminded me of? And this is the most bizarre reference ever. And there's no way that you will be able to understand why I saw these parallels.
Go on.
Cole Nunn at Matchams in 2005. Don't know why. KTM, I guess? Just the British GP, British rider, British team rider, coming out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I was still high on meds, but I was really feeling that.
Nunn was also on a 1.25 two-stroke then, I think.
I don't know. Well, he was on Champ KTM, but I can't remember what his CCs would have been.
He was an outlier on the factory KTM setup, so that's why I think he might have been riding a 1.25. I really can't remember now, but yeah, you know he was leading by a long way and toppled off because he won the first moto, and in the second he was leading.
He went 1:14 on the day.
Yeah. But he was close to doing a 1-1, which would have brought the house down.
And would have been unexpected for him, especially. And I've just realised we are probably 2 weeks, 10 days past the 20-year anniversary of the Matchams Grand Prix, which is shocking, to be honest. Even more shocking is I remember I think I've mentioned this on a podcast before, in COVID at MX Vice, I did a Matchums GP celebration for the 15th anniversary, and I interviewed Coenen, and I interviewed all of the riders who did well on that day, and did as one of the most fun things I've done, and also why I know a lot more about Coenen at that time. When I was 9, I didn't know much. But anyway, beside the point. Also, I'd like us to adopt Oriol Oliver. You did a story with him in Germany. It's on trackoffroad.substack.com. Substack?
Yep.
Substack?
That's it.
I like Oriol Oliver. I've never spoken to him, but I just like the underdog nature of it. So I think we should adopt him as a podcast hero, and we'll cheer for him for this podium coming up.
He's got another 8 rounds to do it. So I'm hoping he does, because it would be, I don't know, like you say, it's the underdog thing. He's 23, he ages out of the category, he has to go to MXGP next year or go to the US and ride a 250. And he's been getting closer and closer, and like Sean Simpson, the team manager of the crew over there, said, he just is a case of a rider that just hasn't really had the right environment or the right backing in his career up until that point. And crucially, I think it shows that MXGP doesn't need to be full of teenage phenomenons like the Coenens. There are places there is space for career development, and there are plenty of examples of as well as people like Oriol who have been able to sort of stay free of injury and are able to progress, and maybe are not the most earth-shattering in terms of talent, but they do have all the other ingredients in place in terms of having the right attitude, work ethic, and a willingness to learn. And so that's also, I think, part of the appeal behind that. So for every, like I say, Coenen or Simon Längenfelder, a rider who's had factory backing for a couple of years now, you do have these riders who seize opportunities.
Yeah, and perhaps points to the misguided nature of the age rule, because that hints that the powers that be see MX2 as a class where if you're talented at 17, it's for you, and if not, go home.
Yeah, I get it. I get the reason to. I mean, and it's not a new thing. It's been maybe 15 years now that we've had the 23 age rule. Maybe 2010 or 11, I want to say, was the first time it came in. And I get the idea of it is to push and keep the MXGP class as like the premium category, but I think it just needs maybe a year or two more, or some sort of qualifier rule whereby if you post your first podium when you were 22 or 23, then that gives you an extra year or two to really, I don't know, continue your development on the right kind of machinery and in the right kind of environment before suddenly going into sort of mid-pack obscurity on the 450.
Yeah, agreed. To sum up the two topics we started with some points I wanted to make. One, track prep. I've seen a lot of people claim MXGP needs an athlete liaison, someone to work with the promoters and the riders. They tried that. That's where this podcast, I think, is quite critical, because we can answer these things. They tried that in 2016 with Rui Goncalves. He was at every race as an in-front appointed member of staff. He was the go-between. He was holding meetings with all the riders after qualifying on Saturday. There's a photo in Thailand of him with every rider crowded around him, and for whatever reason it died out. I don't even really know why, to be honest. I think that what we've seen with exercises like that is when push comes to shove, a lot of riders just can't be bothered.
Yeah.
Because also after the strike, they implemented a system where effectively each race would have a different rider liaison so that no one felt the burden of it. So like 1 week was first in each class, then second in each class, third in each class. And by all accounts, same thing. It was going for a little while, and then it got to certain riders who didn't care. It lost momentum, and that died as well. So it has been tried in multiple facets and just hasn't turned into anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's solidarity only in moments of crisis, which isn't the basis for a union or some sort of movement. And also to give the stability or consistency needed to improve standards. I think you need someone who's dedicated to that role, and Rui had the job for maybe 2 seasons, I think. But then obviously it's a pretty big responsibility to try. And also, one of the things, MXGP does have a track team, but I think we've said this on the podcast many times, Lewis, that, one facility or one club or one circuit to the other can be vastly different in terms of the resources that they have. I mean, look at this case in this weekend in Matterley Basin. If what you're saying about the allotment of watering, or the amount of water to be able to sort of look after the track properly was really that limited, then it doesn't matter if you have someone like Rui Gonçalves or Tony Cairoli or whoever, trying to sort of relay the riders' concerns to the organisation. There's only so much that can be done.
Yeah, and ultimately, as bad as this sounds, it's easier to do if you are trying to craft the perfect track for this main event of MX2 and MXGP, and you have hours to work around and observe and nitpick. Ultimately, decisions are being made at 8 a.m. on race day, and then there's just wall-to-wall action where there's no room to pivot or react, and you're ultimately club event, amateur event, professional event. If you have that many bikes on track throughout the day, it's going to go to a point where it's beyond saving. That's just...
And there's also calls being made in hours, because I think in Portugal you could see that the track was extremely hard and it was sealed on the Saturday for the qualifying. Because the organisers knew that the weather forecast was atrocious for Sunday. So they didn't want to rip or treat the track too much, because, it would have been even worse for the Grand Prix motor. So that kind of short-termism doesn't help things either.
Yeah, I would agree. And then the second point on the topic we started with is I don't know if this is possible. I was going to message you this. I would like to do a story on the inner workings of what the situation was with Cairoli wanting to race more, but KTM not really facilitating that, and why. And because I know that's out there and there's some truth to it, but I don't really know what Tony wanted to do and what he wasn't allowed to do. I know it wasn't just racing; it was also testing that he wanted to get more involved in, and there wasn't really room for that. But I don't know. I think maybe it may be too raw still for there to be a story on it. But I'd like to dive into that.
Also, I mean, he was appointed as team manager, but then, not a team manager in the 360 sense. I don't think Tony was sitting down doing emails and coordinating travel and allocation of spares and stuff like that. I think it was more like a rider coach ambassadorial leadership thing.
Yeah.
So that was, I don't know how long something like that would have been able to continue. Red Bull KTM, I think we're in a period of transition then as well. I mean, you had Jorge Prado, who was fully implicated inside sort of the Cairoli faction of Red Bull KTM, but then wasn't for a while because him and Tony were rivals. Jeffrey Hurlings is still there. Once I think Tony felt he wanted to stand back from full-time racing, then that obviously forced KTM's hand to make a decision. Maybe it's also a budget thing as well. I mean, I think it would be a good story, Lewis. I just don't know how long you'll have to leave it before he's ready to really talk about the ins and outs of it.
Yeah, Cairoli's always been quite PR savvy,
diplomatic.
Yeah, that's the word. Maybe someone like Jeffrey, you could get into it a lot sooner, but I think it would take. I think it's certainly too soon at the moment. Speaking, you mentioned Prado there. We are going to get into that on this episode because there's a lot of criticism, a lot of wild theories, and in my personal opinion, who better to discuss it than the people who have literally been by his side since his first race. It's spoken to him every week and tracked his development. And all of that.
Going back to Matterley first, and also the British Grand Prix, I think it's quite telling that Jeffrey Hurlings won in Germany, and then also in Latvia, and Lucas Coenen managed to get on the podium in Great Britain. But I think it was quite telling as well that his comments post race were pretty much like he was happy to get out of there healthy. It just seemed sort of high speed, hard to judge, hard to make any time. And, it wasn't, I don't know, it was a frustrating set of second motos. And, I think we've seen Matterley Basin in better shape. And it was also a little despairing to see the crowd turnout. I do wonder if the British fans are kind of, they need a change. They've been to Matterley for X amount of years. I mean, pretty much almost 20 years, since it first sort of stepped up as a British GP and Motocross of the Nations venue in 2006. I think, it would be good to try somewhere else and then come back to Matterley and then alternate and move around a little bit like the Italian and the French tend to do. But I think it's also an immense credit to Steve Dixon, the relationship he has with the landowners and the whole structure he has in place, because organising an event in the UK is far more complicated than I'm sure for other countries on the continent in terms of traffic plans, permits, permissions from the local government and the council. Dixon, I think, has that formula down to a fine art. So, staging a Grand Prix of Matterley Basin just becomes a subject of budget. And, that's why I think also, in previous years, we've seen provisional calendars published and Matterley hasn't been there. And then there's been a problem of maybe one or two sites and it's suddenly been added because, Steve is able to make a GP happen relatively quickly and easily, thanks to all his experience. So that is a virtue, it's an asset. But, maybe we need to put the British GP for 1 year somewhere else. And perhaps it's a disaster in another track. And then we realize how good things are at Matterley. But crucially, to sort of go on with a long-winded point, the riders, when Matterley is in prime state, love it. I think it's probably one of the favorite tracks for many in the MXGP gate, when it has those kind of optimum conditions.
Yeah, and I think that's why they were so critical of the weekend, because they were expecting this track that they know and love, and they didn't quite get that version of it. I was dismayed by the crowd turnout on Saturday, encouraged that so many more turned up on Sunday in comparison.
Yeah, that's true.
But ultimately, I think it just comes down to, and maybe it's the same in every country because I don't read other languages, but the British are purists. You could argue the best days of British motocross have been and gone in that period we talked about with Matchams, where you had Mackenzie and Sword and Nunn and Tommy, all in the mix and everything like that. And I just think that of all the people who criticise in front and want it to go back to the good old days, it's British fans on Facebook, as far as I can tell. So there isn't a lot of positivity surrounding the event, and I think that's what you see in the turnout. I think that there's almost a lot of purist British fans who are perhaps older who don't go out of resentment almost for in front and thinking in front is doing more than they actually are. I've spoken to a few people who didn't go and wish they did go. Like, it's not just the vibe of it amongst social media and stuff. It isn't discussed as like it's going to be this fantastic weekend. It's almost portrayed in such negativity that people stay away, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the crown jewel, like the annual big thing anymore. Just from the comments and sort of the feedback I get. I mean, you still get, I think, hardcore motocross fans knowing that it is a pretty fantastic track. I mean, the viewing and everything, the setting is almost peerless. But I think you're right, Lewis. I mean, it does seem like there's more of a swell of interest and enthusiasm around things like the veteran motocross of nations and other kind of other off-road events in the UK. Maybe it is related to some of the talent in the gate. Are people tired of seeing Romain Febvre and Jeffrey Hurlings? I don't know. Are they inspired by going to see the Coenens race? It's really difficult to put your finger on it, but I do think maybe switching up the British GP 1 year and trying another track or another sort of geographical spot in the UK could be the solution. Yeah,
because it is quite southern, so for a lot of people it is far to go. Americans will laugh because in America, driving 10 hours for something is considered up the road. But in England, driving more than 3 hours is considered almost...
Yeah, I'm always amazed by the amount of turnout like Hawkstone Park gets, because the viewing sucks. You can't really see that much of the track. I mean, it's a non-existent paddock. But every time I've been there, usually like right at the beginning of the year for the International in February, it's just like it's a lot of people. And it's sort of based in the Midlands of the UK, so it's probably easier for people in the north, as well as the south, east, west, or whatever to get to. Try something like Hawkstone if there can be some other venue.
I've always wondered though, like, Hawkstone looks impressive, but it's so small and the fan areas are so compact. Yeah. Like, if you picked up that fan count, is it actually the same as what we have in Matterley? But Matterley is so sprawling that you just don't get the impact.
But then on the other side of the coin, even if it is the same crowd at Matterley, you get the sensation that it's busy and it's something important and it's something that matters. And that could also inspire some industry people, some backers, some more sponsorship, and then that would help somewhere like Hawkstone to invest even more, and it starts to get a bit bigger. There's just that snowball effect. I mean, I don't know if a track like Fat Cats, sort of that sandy circuit near Doncaster could potentially entertain a GP. I don't know if there are other venues in the UK, but as I mentioned, Steve and the Matterley crew, have it down for running a Grand Prix on a sort of a skeletal backing and team. So that will ensure that it's just a simplistic option.
We've discussed this before as well, but I know that in 2019 sort of time, there was discussion about running a British GP at Western.
Oh my God.
Yes, right. I know for sure that there was meetings, and I think even Luongo visited Western, but that wasn't going to be in place of Matterley. That was going to be in addition, as far as I can remember.
There was also a rumor that former TT racer and TV personality Guy Martin has a track in sort of northern England.
He did say it was his dream to run a GP.
Yeah,
I don't even know if that track still exists.
Yes. Well, I've got no idea of whether it's apt for a British Grand Prix or not. But I mean, if you remember, around the turn of the previous decade, there were some ambitious projects going on, especially from like the Northern Irish Tourist Board, of just sort of building tracks in sort of very obscure places in sort of Northern Ireland to make a GP happen. That kind of budget and speculative attitude, I suspect, is in short supply these days. I mean, I don't think that kind of money is around anymore. And you can't exactly say that the events were a great success because we never really went back and there was no stability. And I don't know, Lewis, but I mean, Saturday's watching the qualification heats, I was like, wow, okay. It doesn't look great. And there were more fans on Sunday, but it's a shame that somewhere as big and vast as Matterley doesn't draw in more of a crowd.
Yes, for sure. Before we move on, snapping levers, that's weak and outdated. Polysport's APT unbreakable levers bend on impact, bend back to their original shape and let you keep riding. With a stainless steel core built for war, they are rock solid strong and designed to match the OEM levers' shape and specs. The Polysport's APT unbreakable levers stand up to every challenge. Thank you to Polysport, polysport.com, for all that they do for the sport and us here on this podcast. And we are going to be doing more with Polysport, but obviously I've delayed that by not coming up with ideas while I've been out of action. So stay tuned. Romain Febvre won the GP, of course. It was a procession, as we discussed. Do you read much into this? Do you point to this as momentum has turned again? Are you now much more convinced that Romain will take this championship? Or are you more just in the same state you were pre-Matterley?
I think it was essential that Febvre beat Lucas Coenen and get a couple more points on him because the trend was going the other way. I mean, there was a couple of GPs where Lucas, I think, had been able to outscore the Frenchman. So this was like I think a pretty crucial reverse. I'm actually working on a feature for Racer X about Romain, and I spoke to a couple of people in Tuchental about him and his career and his strengths and his weaknesses, and it's actually quite interesting. And I really love the narrative that it's 10 years since he won his first title. We spoke about this on the German GP podcast, I think. So I'm hoping that Romain, manages to take this with Lucas all the way to the end, because Coenen has the confidence, the youth, and sort of the willing abandon, if you like. And one of the interesting parts of the story is just about Febvre analysing how, over the years, due to injuries and experience and age, that he's changed his sort of approach to MXGP racing. Even though I think he has a crazy statistic, like from all of his years in MXGP, he's finished, top 3 or top 4 in most of the season. So he's consistently been like a guy who can win a Grand Prix. And kind of like Jeffrey Hurlings, he's only really been sidelined by trips to the medical center. So good result. And after his win in Onay, this was a bounce back because obviously in Germany and Latvia he didn't make it. The season rolls on.
To his credit, 10 podiums in a row. I think that's worth mentioning. His career best run is 13 in 2015, and I would bet that he will probably string together a couple more to beat that here coming up, which will make it difficult for Lucas. And I also want to stop this narrative as well as answering questions and silencing things. I'm seeing more and more talk of sand races are coming up. Romain's going to lose a lot of points. No, Romain's really good sand rider. At 2021, his only GP win was Lommel. So he's more than capable in the sand. Is he better than Coenen and Herlings? No. But is he drastically worse than Coenen? No. He will...
No.
They will swap moto scores.
Yeah, and he's got far more experience on, a 450 in the sand. I mean, I'm sure Lucas as well has probably done quite a few motos around Lommel too. But yeah, I think people should write off Febvre's chances, at their own risk, because, there's no reason he could be right behind Lucas or even in front of him sort of when we get to Lommel. And it's nice that the championship's shaping up, that I think Coenen has the most pole positions, he's led the most laps, he's won the most motos, but, Romain has the most GP wins now with 4. I think he also has the most amount of podiums too. So they're kind of sharing the stats a little bit, and it's quite equal.
Yeah, I was quite impressed as well when I noticed that Lucas has been top 2 in the last 7 Grand Prix. That's quite impressive for a rookie.
For a rookie as well.
I would have bet that there would have been a 3rd place in there. Or top 2 is quite exceptional. Obviously, Jeffrey took points from him at the previous 2 races, and Jeffrey will continue to play a role because based on his speed in qualifying and Moto 1 on a track that I wouldn't think we would, or track conditions I don't think we would list as Jeffrey's speciality. I think it's fair to say he's back to his best, maybe 2021 level, and will win a lot here coming up. But that's not the big debate. The big debate is Tim Geiser and Jeffrey Herlings are yet to sign. And that is why the MXGP paddock is still on standstill.
First reference in British GP, I want to give props to Glenn Coldenhoff, because, he won the first moto, wasn't it? And I think, that's his first moto win in a while.
2 years.
Yeah, so I think you got to give him props for that. Also, I think he'd had some sort of you could see in the TV interview afterwards, he had some personal bad news. To see Glenn emotional like that was a little bit upsetting. But, he's on 4 podiums now for the season. We're past the halfway stage, around 12 of 20. I'd like to know when the last time was that Glenn sort of, reached 5, 6, 7 podiums in a season, because I don't think it's been that many for a couple of years as well.
Well, enter
just
Lewis.
Being speculative. Okay. Well, open your spreadsheet.
His highest podium count in a single season is 6. That was in 2022, which he would have been Gas? No. Yamaha? No. Yeah, Yamaha.
Yamaha,
yeah. That was the year he won in Finland. He's had 4 this year, of course, as you mentioned. But what stuck out to me is we know that Glenn typically catches fire in the second half of a season. That was the narrative, especially through his KTM gas years. He's never had this many podiums in the first half of a season. So this is by far his greatest start to a season. And if you want to lean on history, he's going to get better here coming up. He was dealing with a sickness that kind of worried me a little bit around Germany sort of time. It sounded more Epstein-Barr than just the flu, but it sounds as though he's over that now, and I mean the results indicate that as well. But yeah, I think undersold is the fact that this is the best start to a season that Glenn Coldenhoff has ever had, which is phenomenal. And also, I want to give a tip of the hat to Glenn, because we give Jeremy so much credit for consecutive Grand Prix, with the exception of missing the last 6 in 2020, which is when he crashed at Lommel and there was fear of paralysis and it was quite a scary incident. He's not missed any. He's only missed 6 in the last... Well, he's missed 6 in his 450 career, which started in 2015.
Wasn't it 2018 when he had the big crash?
But that was pre-season. He was back.
Yeah.
That
was in Lommel. That was the big one in Lommel, because he was riding standing construct KTM then.
Yeah.
But yeah, great stats, Lewis. And I think we've also been guilty of not giving him enough praise this season on the podcast. But he's just been sort of tootling along under the radar because we've had other things to talk about, like Lucas Coenen, like Geiger's early dominance and then the injury, like Jeffrey Herlings' plight to come back. Romain Febvre's kind of consistency, Maxime Renault's injury problems. I mean, even people like, Bonacorsi, Coldenhoff's teammate, sort of starting well and producing these sort of electric performances, even though they're few and far between. So I think we have to give Glenn some props because he has longevity. I mean, he's still able to be a podium guy in MXGP, and he's into his 30s, and he's had a long career. 2015 was Romain Febvre's first year in MXGP. It was his first World Championship, like we said, but then it was also Glenn's first season in GBs, and it was his first as a rookie. He also won the Latvian round for Suzuki. Apart from Kevin Strybos, I think it was 2 years later in Lommel. I mean, that was one of the last wins for the former great Mark in GP racing. So props to Glenn.
Yes, for sure. I think, in fact, as I was diving into Glenn's career when I was laid up, I felt the need to do almost an entire podcast on it because it's really quite like when you look at when you have his numbers laid out in front of you, his success kind of comes out of nowhere, but his success always comes in clumps. It's rare for him to just have one good race. For instance, when he won that Latvian Grand Prix in 2015, his results before that race, which I don't remember it being like this, were 13, 14, 10, 15, 8, 19, 15, 6, 15, 10, 8, 1. Like, what? That makes I don't remember it being like that. I remember him not having a podium, but that's ridiculous. And there's a lot of instances like that where he just appears as a threat after a difficult run and then sustains it for a little while. It's
he was working with Joel Smets, who was on the Suzuki team at the time, and there was some talk about Glenn being able to do it, but I think Coldenhoff's problem in his career has just been illness or injury. There's almost like a fragility there. Once he reaches a point where his performance is peaking, then there's some slip up, and it always tends to ruin things. Like, I think you use the word clumps, and that's a perfect kind of description of how both the peaks and troughs appear in his career. He's just one of those frustrating, talented, like very professional riders that, just struggles to really maintain a high level for the duration of a whole 18, 19, 20 round series.
Yeah, for sure. And he is actually now quite an interesting player in silly season because, to wrap this up quite quickly, no one has signed. So officially nothing has changed since our last podcast. No one has made any moves. But what I do now know as a matter of fact is Wilvo will be Ducati next year.
Yes.
Which Sewer is still under contract with Ducati. Guadagnini has an option on Ducati's side, which I would question whether they're going to renew. Ducati, I highly suspect, is talking to Geyser and Hurlings. So I think that they will have a big player in some form. Wilvo, which they don't want to be called Wilvo anymore because Louis Vosters isn't associated with Wilvo. So we're going to try and wean ourselves off of that, but you now need to understand that Wilvo is Louis Vosters. So Louis Vosters typically runs 3 riders. So perhaps Coldenhoff could be a 3rd rider at Ducati if Mattia leaves. But I do know, spicy little rumour, I do know that Coldenhoff has spoken to a few teams about doing outdoors in 2026, full-time as kind of like a farewell. So
interesting.
Yeah, that's spicy little Lewis rumour. So I don't know what Coldenhoff's going to do, but what I don't know is what Fantic are going to do. I would question quite greatly whether Fantic would have an operation that's capable of doing what it is right now. If I'm Glenn and Fantic offer me the same money, etc., I think I would be very hesitant.
It's confusing how things swap around because I thought the Maddie setup that currently run the Ducati team had another year on the contract.
They do, but it's not working out. And perhaps that changes and the contract holds, but as far as I've been told, it's not exactly. Yeah. And also, chink for Lewis. You won't remember this. 2022 Lockett. We were on Racer X with this podcast at that point. I said, and I remember this because I was quite nervous about saying it because I thought I'd get a lot of shit. I said I walked past a Maddie operation, looked at it and thought to myself, is that really going to be Ducati? That's not Ducati.
Yeah, you called it a European team,
yes,
if I remember right.
And 3 years later, look who was proven right. It's all come full circle because apparently the organisation, the operations, the communications just isn't there for what Ducati needs. Whereas Wilvo, I think that's where they thrive. If anything, they're maybe too business-y, but that's obviously what you need at a top level, especially a new manufacturer.
Yeah, I think we have to maybe explain that the Vosters setup is on another level. I mean, we're talking like this huge two-tiered workshop, state of the art gym, apartments, space. I mean, it's almost like a car racing, setup. It's really quite special, and that was the reason why Louis was pretty much the reference for the Yamaha factory team for a few years. The Fantic, I think, will exist. They're looking for another, team operation. I sort of found that out in Mugello last weekend.
Couldn't you see Maddie going back to Fantic? Because they were Fantic beforehand.
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But also, I think we maybe have to give Maddie some credit, because maybe that was what Ducati needed. And don't forget that before they came to MXGP, they were doing regional and national Italian races. Maybe that was the kind of level. Maybe they needed a team that were prepared to step away from Grand Prix and sort of that pressure environment of competing and develop a motorcycle. So, like you say, Lewis, you were rightly questioning the validity of the Maddie team to go Grand Prix racing, but it might have been just the first step that Ducati needed. And now they're thinking, right, we've got a bike that can make the podium in the Premier class. We need a team that could maybe pull up to the next level. And of course, if you want to sign someone like Tim Geiger or Jeffrey Hurlings, then you need the sort of infrastructure that the Vosters team will bring.
I think the money that the Vosters team can bring in signing a rider like that is also quite useful, because we know Ducati isn't exactly spending an unlimited budget on this project. Maybe Maddie sticks around as a Italian championship team, testing operation, or maybe that doesn't change.
But I would have thought that Geiger would stay with Honda, because if they don't sign, I mean, the Coenens have 2 years left on their KTM deal, and if Honda are not going to spend big to get them out of the contract, and the Coenens maybe are deciding, okay, one more year in GP racing, and then we go to the US. They try to tilt KTM's hand. We're still in the same situation, I think, we were in Tuchenthal, where we don't really know the size of KTM's footprint in MXGP next year. And until those emails or conversations are rubber stamped, then you're also not going to know who's going to be riding where.
Yes. For Geiser, honestly, it's all confusing. It's the most confusing, silly season ever. From what I know, if I'm a betting man, I bet that at minimum, either Geiser or Hurlings are on a different manufacturer next year. And I would, if you want me to bet on whether they'll both be on the same or they'll both be different, I bet on they'll both be different, I think.
Okay.
But then also, it's just all talk at this point. Honda, I don't think Honda are any closer to a resolution with Geiser, because from what I know, they're calling everyone. And from what I know, Yamaha are also calling everyone and have had a conversation with Geiser now, which is bizarre because Renault's there. So it honestly seems like the paddock's in disarray, and it's almost like open season, and everyone thinks they can talk to everyone, and everything's a possibility.
Well, also, what's happening with the Coenens? Are they still with, Lucas Myrtle? I also heard in Mugello at the weekend that they're more inclined to be with the Wasserman rather than Myrtle. And how does that affect their negotiations and their strategy for the future? And also, who's at the top of the pecking order anyway? I mean, if Hurlings is coming with a huge price tag of what he wants to commit to, and is it 1 year or two? Because if you're a factory team, you might be interested in keeping a rider of that caliber for 2 rather than just 1 speculative year. And the same applies to Geiger, because I think it'd be really interesting if they swap places, like Hurlings somehow ends up at HRC, and then Geiger, takes a Red Bull KTM saddle. I mean, that would be sort of wild. But yeah, like you say, Lois, it's one of those things where, it's just a bit. Silly season is incredibly apt. It's an incredibly apt description right now.
Well, my final 2 points on silly season are, now I'm hearing that Längenfelder has a clause in his contract that says if he wins the championship, KTM have an option that they can exercise. So now everyone's telling me that Längenfelder to Triumph is off, and stop saying that because he's staying at KTM. So I don't know. If Längenfelder stays at KTM and the Coenen stay at KTM, I would think that Längenfelder moves to the Austrian side, if that's still there, which is also a question mark, but I think it will be.
But just my reaction on that is, if Längenfelder's MX2 world champion, then how do you appease him I guess you offer him much more money. You offer him, star billing on a 450, and like you say, you move him perhaps to the Austrian side of the team. Do Austria even still run a factory team? And if they do, how many riders will it be? These are all questions I think that need to be answered. But it does seem strange to have a clause that would force a rider to stay in your setup if he's champion.
I've heard of that of a few teams, though.
Yeah.
I think maybe not.
Yeah.
And then finally, which leads me onto a topic I wanted to talk about. I do not believe this for a second, but a persistent rumour to come from MXGP is that Prado has called a couple of teams just to see what the situation is. Which leads us to, I want us to just quickly have our say on this, and I think it's going to be quite a short conversation because we're both going to say the same thing. Prado is better than this, and anyone who's now trying to claim that Prado is just this good and the American series is just this much better is insane.
Yeah.
And I'm interested if you agree with me on this, because I think of Prado as more of a Ryan Dungey than a Jeffrey Hurlings, in the sense that he performs when everything is optimal. He's not so good at pushing through an adverse situation and transforming it into success against all odds. I think he needs everything, all of his ducks to be in a row in order for him to be at his best. It's kind of the personality that I've picked up on over the years. Fair?
Yes. Can I give my opinion very quickly on Prado? I think anyone that's saying he's not good enough, or Kawasaki have made a mistake or anything like that, need to have their head checked. The guy is absolute class, and you need to look at the context of his career to give him more time, because he has ridden Austrian machinery since he was maybe 10 years old or younger. So changing already to another brand, you need to give him time. Hurt his shoulder, did 3 rounds of Supercross, if that. Again, he's coming back from injury. His last motocross race was back at the Motocross of Nations. So he needs time. The AMA Pro Nationals, as we know, is an intense series. What do they get? 2 to 3 fast laps before they're already into the races. Yeah. Again, this is, while Prado came in and smashed GP racing as a 16-year-old, he had been riding European championships, and he had sort of felt his way through European tracks. So he, had that acclimatization. He needs time. One thing I think Jorge maybe has misjudged a little bit is, his press work. And, I think his enthusiasm for being in the US and tackling Supercross and motocross and SMX, has led to him making some statements that he's, very positive. He's going to smash it. He's going to be great. The Kawasaki's a fantastic bike to ride. I think the whole novelty of the situation maybe, influence some of his media chatter. And I think he maybe, upon reflection, needs to be a bit more standoffish with that, a little bit more reserved, because it hyped expectations. And, I think people just need to chill, give him more time. And if he's still perhaps doing this kind of form without injury in 2026, then start to be a bit more critical and say, listen, this is not really what we expected from, a 4-time world champion in both classes in Europe against across some of the most diverse, racing surfaces you can find. At the very least, he demands more respect, and he demands that kind of transitional period. Yes, you could say Marvin Musquin and Ken Roxon and the Lawrences were able to maybe get to grips with it slightly quicker. I would put Jorge Prado in that kind of generational bracket. For sure. But every fucker is different. Just give him a little bit more time. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to what I said as well about Prado. Just, I don't know how to quite describe it correctly, but I do think he doesn't do well with adversity, or maybe that's too extreme. But I think, for instance, 2022, he really didn't get on with the gas, and his results were non-existent all year long. He had 1 GP win in 18 rounds or whatever it was that year, and then the next year he was a champion. The switch flipped because it was a matter of comfort, whereas a rider like Hurlings can maybe overcome that more so and muscle a situation. But Prado, and I think it also maybe comes down to Prado's build a little bit and how he needs to be in the right window. In hindsight, and I'm sure he would maybe agree to this, well, it was never correct for him to badmouth KTM as much as he did. And I know that there are people in Austria who are very, very put out by this and kind of can't believe that he said these things after they gave him so much. That's obviously now not helping his case and the way he's perceived because you told us the Kawasaki was going to be amazing. But also in hindsight, I think it was misguided for him to take on the massive challenge of a new country, a new series, a new way of life, new food, new travel, new humidity, new heat, new time zones, and a new bike. We've never, from memory, I can't think of someone of his stature who's moved and taken on a new bike. Like Roxon, Marvin, they all were good in their first years, but they were not the riders who we came to know in Europe, and they were on the same bike. And
they stay inside the Red Bull KTM structure.
So there's some familiarity. If anything, there's no familiarity for Jorge at the moment at all. So he's got nothing
also,
to cling to.
Yeah, just to cut across you there. I mean, look at Tom Vial. People have been critical of Vial's kind of results. And imagine if Tom had jumped straight out of Red Bull KTM, where he, made this kind of nest, made his home, and was riding, a Honda or something like that. I think it would have been much more tough. It would have been much tougher for him than being outside of the Austrian kind of setup. Where he's having daily dialogue with Joel Smets. He's able to sort of call Pit Byra, and Pit Byra is saying things to Roger DeCosta and Harrison, take care of this guy. He's been great for us in Europe. Muscan and Roxon did the same thing. I mean, Prado has really jumped straight into a different boat. And, I think we just, again, I repeat myself, I think we just need to give him more time. And I think he was slightly naive in just sort of, I wouldn't say talking up his chances, but just being overawed by the whole thing. And the same thing with American riders coming to Grand Prix racing. We always say, yes, the same time-honored tale of having to deal with different cultures, different languages, the distance, everything like that, all valid points. But the same also applies to Prado. As much as European riders say, I can't wait to get to the US, and, there's this kind of inspirational, aspirational tone or nature about their ambitions or whatever, it's also a big, big shift. And Prado's still a young guy as well. Just give the guy a break,
Yeah. Also, again, I think his PR needs some work, because even after the second round of Hangtown, when things were already not going great, but certainly better than they are now, I was kind of giving him some softball questions about stuff that Vial and Anstey have told me about having to change starting technique because of the way the dirt is prepped on the other side of the gate, and you'd never think of this. And I was telling him this and how stuff he'd never thought about in an interview. And he cut across me and went, Lewis, motocross is motocross. I win in Europe, I can win here. And in my head, I'm like, that's great. But that's actually not true. Because I'm telling, I even started the question with Tom told me the reason he doesn't whole shot here, and and I think now maybe he needs to come to terms with that. But also, again, knowing him and his position in the paddock so well, I want to use a different word, but I can't come up with one. His cockiness has infuriated Cairoli, Hurlings, etc., Febvre at points over the years. So perhaps his way of communicating has never quite been apt or correct, but it's always been okay because he's always been at the top of his game. Yeah. And now he's not. That's starting to bite him in the arse a little bit more. And then the only sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I'm saying this is the first kind of real dip in sort of form and results compared to expectations that he's really had. I mean, you mentioned that first year on the Gas when they were trying to get the chassis sorted out, but still then Prado was a top 3 guy most weekends. He wasn't winning as much as he wanted. And ever since he came into GPs, like we said, as a sort of 15, 16-year-old, he came into the class as soon as he could. He's been winning, he's been hyped, he's been feted. Everybody's been saying what a mercurial talent he is. And he has embraced that, and he knows how good he is. But I think this is a whole new challenge, and maybe tougher than he thought in the US, and realistically so. But maybe we're asking too much of, again, generational talents to have this awareness that, they're fallible, and, they actually need to keep working and keep developing. I'm sure they know that. I mean, they work incredibly hard, not just Jorge, but anybody who aspires to have a factory contract at any level of racing. But yeah, it's he's obviously not having a good time at the moment. You can see through the results, but I've no doubt that he's trying to sliding the pieces of the puzzle together to grab a cliche.
Yeah, no, without doubt. And then the only other points I had is the only other time I can think of, like, it's not even a dip in form, but a time when he didn't meet expectations was when he won the EMX 125 title in 2015, went straight to EMX 250, didn't win a moto, and was kind of a fringe podium guy to begin with, or partly because he was so small compared to his competition.
Yeah.
But I remember at that point, people were like, oh, I expected him to come in and win immediately. But then he swapped a subpar EMX 250 campaign for a transition to MX2 mid-season and podiumed on debut.
And he was still at school.
So not quite apples to apples.
Well, but he, like Jeremy Sewer, Jeremy was also racing Grand Prix while he was still studying. I mean,
Yeah.
and Tim Geiger the same, and these guys were complaining to us at the time in the paddock, I wish I could follow like a full-time training regime, but I have to fit in my studies around racing.
And then there's also, speaking of Sewer, Kawasaki has proven to be a difficult bike to adapt to in Europe, admittedly, but, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I know for a fact, that last year, certain riders spoke to Jorge about the Kawasaki, and he was all praise and everything. And these riders were like, oh, just wait and see. And I now know some of the complaints are the same things he kind of batted away last year. So I think it comes back to what you said about maybe there was some naivety about just the weight of the challenge, but then this is a rider who's never had to deal with that, so understandable. I think the bow I put on all of this is this once again underlines to me the hidden benefits of being like Tim, being like Jeffrey, and sticking with the same team for the duration of your career. Even when there's a new model that maybe isn't ideal, it's still better than having to start from scratch. I mean, look at Chase on KTM, Jeremy on Kawasaki, Glenn when he first got to Yamaha. Those were all switches that the rider initiated, and just it took a lot longer than anyone expected. Like, it just didn't work to begin with. Glenn turned it around. Jeremy never did. Chase has to a degree, although he's still not happy. And yeah, I don't know.
The best example, Lewis, is Tony Cairoli. In 2004, he linked up with Claudio De Carli on a Yamaha and stayed with that setup his whole career. And look how much that delivered, through a change of Yamaha machinery, then onto KTM, winning titles with the 350, the 450. It's he's the prime example of how when you find your group that can support you in so many ways, then you don't budge out of that. And I know Jorge had his beef with KTM because he felt he was undervalued. He had to push quite hard to get a renewed contract, even though he was locked into a long-term one that he signed for his own volition. He somehow felt slighted by KTM towards the end. And, he's aired his kind of comments on that. But then also he had a bike and he had the right kind of love, I guess you could say, in some aspects that, enabled him to do the job.
Yeah, and I would bet, without knowing this, I would bet he's pining for his KTM or his gas now, because he's thinking to himself, if I had that, I'd at least be able to show the real me. Yeah, but it's very interesting, and it's not good PR for MXGP, because now all of the people who want to pedal the America is so much better than MXGP are having a field day. I will say also, actually, this needs to be clarified. I strongly believe, and I honestly would take this to the grave, almost did. The reason why Patrell and Guillaume, not Guillaume are competitive and mirroring their MXGP results, if not better, is I believe that to pick a number, 8th place down, MXGP is so much more competitive than America. I strongly believe that. I'll probably get shit for it. But from 8th place up, maybe America is deeper and more competitive than MXGP. That's why you see such a striking contrast from the lower tier riders to the top tier riders, even Boutron and whatnot. So that's that as well.
And I also think your chances of going a perfect season MXGP is zilch.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 8 more rounds, but even then to stitch together 24 consecutive moto wins in MXGP, Hurlings has probably come closest, Stefan Everts as well in 2006. but that's their how can I describe it? The rarity rather than the common thing. And when you go into a season thinking, well, is Jet Lawrence going to win every moto again now? I think that's also says something about also Lawrence, but then about the series. But I think the whole this series is better than that series is just a load of nonsense anyway, and it's been around for years and years and years. It's so tired, and the cases are so particular. And I think Prado will be a hell of a lot better in 2026 than he is now.
Agreed. I just wonder if he'll still be in the same situation. We've gone far too long. So, in a word, Simon Längenfelder, is he going to win the MX2 title or not?
Red plate again. He's looking a little bit more assured, isn't he?
52 points is a lot.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what is it? It's almost a GP. I mean, you can get 60 points.
Yeah, nowadays. And Kai is 70 back. Okay, so let's do it this way. Kai is 70 back. Writing him off, championship-wise?
No.
Okay.
But that was a scary crash in Matterley.
Yes.
Where he also picked up Latter as well. But I'm sure people have seen it on social media. And Kai really can't afford many more of those. There's already been a couple of offs and mistakes, this season. And we've speculated on where his head is at. But he's carrying the number one plate, Lewis. And I still fancy that he's got something to say about this. But he needs to grab a couple of wins, I think. And I think the gap now in MXGP, was it 2-3 weekends off before the GP of Finland?
Yeah.
They've come at a great time for Kai. I think, he just needs to sort of reset mentally a little bit and go at it in the second half of the season.
This is a Simon that I expected 2-3 years ago. This is, if anything, is overdue. And if he doesn't win this championship now with a 52-point advantage, that is not a positive look for him, because he has the speed, the talent, the ability to bring this home quite easily now with an advantage like this, I do believe. Although, obviously, a long way to go. 600 points up for grabs.
Yes, and the complicated thing for him is that all of his rivals are pretty much on similar machinery. So it's not like he's going head-to-head with a Yamaha rider and then suddenly, Austria can say, oh, by the way, Sasha, by the way, Andrea, by the way, Liam, if you see Simon struggling or behind you, just let him through so he can grab the points. That's not really going to be the scenario.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. It's actually quite incredible. Simon hasn't finished outside of the top 10 since round 4 of 2022. And that was an 11th. So
in the overalls?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that. I'd say that's a positive for his title chances, because that means his screw-ups aren't significant enough, whereas Kai was 13th in France, for instance. Speaking of which...
It would be good to have a German world champion.
Yeah, it would. I think that would be good for it would change it up a little bit, I feel. A fly racing world champion, that would be quite different in itself. Kai and Simon are tied on the same moto wins, 21, and the same podiums, 34 now, which is quite weird. Don't know what that means, but De Wolf's had 11 less starts than Simon, which surprised me, because I feel like, for whatever reason, I feel like Simon is younger than De Wolf, but... Guess not.
Yeah, it's been 2 hard GPs for Adamo, who was, holding the red plate at one point. I mean, I think he hurt his foot in Latvia on a crash on Saturday, and it's also quite interesting watching the dynamic between the Red Bull KTM riders, because there's not a lot of Pally love and affection there, is there? I mean, no. Sasha Coenen seems to be his own sort of person. He got smashed in the face with a rock or something. Interesting kind of upper lip that he sported in the TV interview post-race. It looked like, he'd eaten something and had an allergic reaction. But, Coenen took the GP win in Latvia and kind of profiting a little bit from Adamo's situation. But, fair play to Sasha. He actually managed to stay on 2 wheels and take that victory. But then there's more talk about him riding Supercross as well, which just frightens me.
Yeah. And also there's talk of them both doing Southwick. By the time that this comes out, there will probably be confirmation one way or the other. You never know with the Coenens. You never know, but it doesn't sound like anyone at KTM is backing this or thinking it's going to happen. So I would lean towards no. And yes, there was talk of Jeffrey doing Southwick. I was pushing for it quite hard. In fact, we actually got quite far with it, but ultimately not happening. So there's that as well. And then also I need to tell you, if I was a motorcycle and I needed to find the gains to bring me back to full health, full capacity, I'd probably head to Prox and buy some parts for myself, because that's where you make the difference at pro-x.com. No matter your make, machine, or year, there are a variety of parts for your motorcycle to bridge the gap. Especially that's how satellite riders bridge the gap to factory machinery. And once again, if your clutch is slipping, a new pair of goggles isn't going to help you, but heading to pro-x.com will. So I would recommend that quite strongly. Anything else?
Very interesting Grand Prix coming up. Finnish Grand Prix at Kimi-ring, which was announced a number of years ago pre-pandemic, and then development stopped. By all accounts, it was a building site for quite a while. Yeah, this is a brand new kind of facility.
Is it finished?
It depends on your definition of finished. I mean, whether it's kind of at the scale that they originally wanted it to be, where it was going to be hosting, MotoGP and potentially Formula One races, then probably no. But it's going to be making its kind of, high-profile international debut of MXGP. I guess it's going to be sandy. It's going to be quite flat. It's within, obviously, a permanent motorsport facility, so people in the US will know about that from the speedway culture. I'm really sort of quite fascinated to see how it will be.
Yeah, well, I'm more fascinated to see how the surroundings are and just what state the Kimi-ring is actually in, because it almost feels like some sort of fairy tale, to be honest. I've heard about it for so long. I was actually waiting for this GP to be cancelled, and I guess now we're 2 weeks out, it's not going to be, although I'm still not entirely confident. But yeah, everyone seems convinced that it will be sandy, which of course all the Finnish Grand Prix that we've had have been sandy, so that's on brand, but that tends to make a better man-made facility track as well, so that's good. And that starts a busy period of sand, because 2 rounds after Kimi-ring we have Lommel, and then shortly after we have Arnhem, and yeah, sand. So
also coming around to the end of June, beginning of July is when some contracts typically tend to have their deadlines for first refusals, and also cut-off points for renewals. So I think we might see 1 or 2 announcements. You'd think if somebody like Jeffrey Hollings is moving on from KTM, or Tim Geiger is moving on from Honda, then you'll get those kind of press releases saying thank you so much for all the service. You'd expect something like that if it turns out to be true.
If we end up with Tim on a Honda and Jeffrey on a KTM in 2026, I give up with silly season, because everything points to the fact that something is going to change. I've never been so convinced that something will change. So if we end up with everything just being the status quo, then I officially will never put any weight in any rumours or discussions I have or anything ever again. But yeah, as you said, we are nearing a conclusion with that.
Get better, Lewis. Get better and get back to a race. Just take your time there, mate.
This has been cute. This has been an interesting experiment for me, because this is the first time I've really done something, and I kept like spacing out, which I haven't done at all. Like, I've not had that symptom, but like there's a few times where I was just like, and I was so that's interesting.
That's probably more my inane droning than any of your physical conditions.
Oh, it means I'll be back in intensive care within.
It's not my fault, please. I don't want to be responsible.
I'll be back there soon enough, but. To be honest, it was a lovely place, lovely people. Can't fault them. I was scared. I was disappointed to leave. Well, I wasn't really. I was quite happy to get out of there. But anyway, right. That has been another episode of the MXGP Podcast Show. MXGP's calendar is a little funny coming up. We've got 2 weekends off, then Finland, then a weekend off. So not many race reviews, but who knows? Maybe we'll slip in a random.
Well, if you're feeling up for it and you've got the energy, then next week let's do a pod. I mean, whether it's on a specific year or a particular subject, then let's try and make it happen to make up for the recent sort of malaise.
Yeah, I quite like the idea of doing a Coldenhoff pod now for some reason, but I feel like that's too premature.
Well, we'd need him, and also.
Well, maybe we can
unless
do
he's
that.
On, he might be up for it.
The riders are more available, obviously, over the next couple of weeks, so let's. If you want to see what you want, I'm struggling to talk. This is the first time I've done anything, so please excuse the fatigue and I'm hanging in there. If you want to see anything at all, on the next podcast, let us know and we'll see what we can do. Because the riders are available, the teams are available, everyone's on hiatus. So I would imagine we could do pretty much anything. Maybe not Jeffrey, because that's our
That's kind of the holy grail of this
dangling
MXGP
carrot
podcast.
that isn't moving any closer. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening. Apologies again for missing Latvia. And we will see you real soon with another episode of the MXGP Podcast Show. Thanks for watching.